I don't see the. Okay, there we go. I didn't see the.
There we go. Thank
Oops.
you.
Should we do another intro, or should we just get into the
Get
questions?
into it. Get into it. It's 12:10. Let's rock and
All
roll.
right. All right. So without further ado, let's get into our community discussion about cancer through the lens of the pandemic. Our first guest is Ruth Brooker. She is the founder of Clean Air for Kids UK. She is from Bristol in the United Kingdom. And the goal of her organization is to improve air quality within her city schools as well as schools beyond, in other parts of the UK. And today she will be discussing her family's experience with her child's leukemia treatment during the height of COVID in 2020, and onwards, since this is still an unresolved, unmitigated pandemic. Ruth, do you want to say just a bit else about yourself before we ask Arijit to introduce himself?
Hi, no, I think you've done an absolutely great job. I don't think I can add anything to that.
All right. Our second guest is Arijit Chakravarty. He is a pharmaceutical researcher as well as a cancer, COVID, and clean air advocate. Arijit, do you want to say a bit about yourself?
Yeah, sure. So, just by way of context, I'm on Twitter. Some of you uh, follow me on that. We've been, from the beginning of the pandemic, we've been working on scientific research on COVID, publishing peer-reviewed papers. My background is I work in the pharma industry, and I have for the last 20 years. I run Fractal Therapeutics, which is a company that's focused on helping pharma companies move their drugs to the clinic and through the clinic more efficiently using mathematical modeling. So when the pandemic hit, we were looking at it from a distance as individuals, going, "Well, this is kind of scary, whatever." And we were listening to what the government had to say and what the CDC had to say, and we sort of had this increasing cognitive disconnect moment where we're like, "Wow, they're saying that, but that doesn't make sense because we're all trained biologists and many of us have PhDs in various subfields of biology." So we were scratching our heads, my colleagues and I, and many of my friends and I, and going, a lot of what they're saying doesn't line up with what we know. And so we got dragged into it, sort of against our will, if you will, in the summer of 2020, where we started asking questions, practical questions such as, how likely is it that the virus will evolutionarily escape our immune systems or escape vaccines? How likely is it that vaccines alone can bring an end to the pandemic? What are the risks posed by relaxing mitigation measures too early? What are the risks of using an altruism first strategy? And what we found was through 2020 and 21, we found that in fact, long before these things came to pass, that yes, the virus was going to escape very quickly evolutionarily. Reinfection was very likely in a short amount of time. And leading with altruism, talking about how we should do this for others, was likely to be. We used game theory to show that that was a huge mistake. And what government should have done is focused on the cost to each of us individually, because most people, as we know now, are extremely selfish and there's very little social solidarity. So we emphasized in 2020 in this paper that you should be talking about what COVID does to individuals, not how being COVID cautious is good for society as a whole, and so on and so forth. So we published a slew of papers back then, and since then I've still been talking about it. We publish a lot less on COVID because it's a lot harder to get people's attention. But the day job really is looking at how to do drug discovery and development. And a lot of what we've been doing, particularly in the field of cancer, and a lot of what we've been doing over the last few years has been dribbling out these papers, really talking about sort of the big picture health risks of COVID. And so that's why I'm here today. I would describe myself as a scientist. For scientists, the use of the word advocate, the use of the word activist, the use of the word educator is a bit of a loaded word, because those are all really valuable roles, but that's not us. We do science, we find new facts, if you will, and then we leave it to the community hopefully, to get those facts out there. So thank you for inviting me today. I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming, and definitely excited to hear more from you. But Ruth, let's circle back to you, since the original concept for this call was about your child's and your family's experience with leukemia and being treated for that at the height of the pandemic. So, do you want to tell us the story there?
Sure. I haven't prepared anything specifically because I hoped we could do a Q&A, which might bring out stuff. But one thing I said to Sarah before we
Right.
started talking was that at the time that my son was going through treatment, I kept a journal. So I think actually looking back at it now, it's actually quite a useful insight into how things were compared to my view now, which is from 2026 looking back. So if you don't mind, I'd quite like to spend a couple of minutes reading.
Absolutely. Let's do it.
Okay.
Great idea.
I have a couple of extracts. They're probably a couple of minutes each. We'll see how we go, and you can tell me to like stop.
Oh, no, you're good.
Okay, so this was a letter that I wrote because Sarah, you asked me about how did I know that he had leukemia.
Yeah, I've been wondering that. How did you know?
Well, I'll read you the letter that I wrote him because I guess in my mind then was that I wanted to explain to him, because he was 2 at diagnosis. The date of diagnosis was November 2019, so obviously just before the world blew up. And yeah, I was obviously processing at that time how I was going to talk to him when he got older and understood a bit about what had happened to him. And to be honest, I think I was probably writing it for myself as well to help process what happened. So I'll just read you that if you like. This is probably written around February 2020, I think. The build up to diagnosis. So everyone usually asks, how did I know you were ill? Well, the first signs were on our blustery October trip to Cornwall. You did so much screeching and crying that one outburst seemed to seamlessly blend into another. And Ben and I were ploughing through red wine in the evenings, trying to soothe our battered nerves. But I didn't pay it much attention because you were about to turn 2. Your brother was a master of tantrums at this age, so I just assumed that it was all part of the toddler package. You had barely blown out the candles on your 2nd birthday cake when on the following day's windy walk, Nanny, his grandmother, remarked that she thought you looked pale. But she's so discreet in her suggestions that I didn't pick up on what she meant and replied, well, yes, Mum, he's got white hair. Later the following week, a friend who'd looked after you described some unusually tired behaviour. This was weird because you are a major sleep denier at the best of times, and that you look pale. This had started to tick away in the back of my head. I concluded that you must be coming down with something, but there was no crusty cough or snot streaming, which didn't fit. By the weekend, I started badgering your dad. He looks pale, Ben. Don't you think he looks pale? I think he looks pale. Ben, who is a hospital doctor in anaesthetics, who's compared to me, the professional hand-wringing worrier, reported, well, pallor doesn't mean anything. He took you to the park and was confused when you wouldn't even attempt to walk. My internal dialogue of concern continued babbling away, so much so that whilst Dad was snoring away on the Sunday night, I was Googling leukemia. I don't know what I thought I knew about that, but something made me idly research the symptoms before bed. I can assure you it's very relaxing pre-sleep material. The symptoms were pale, lethargic, fractious, sleeps a lot, Usually manifests in 2 to 4-year-olds, particularly boys. So this did nothing to abate my worries, but it could have been that you were anemic or any other sodding thing my amateur sleuthing hadn't thought of. So I took a deep sigh and reserved judgment. On the Monday morning, I actually had to wake you up at 8 o'clock, which had literally never happened before. You were always up at 6. We took Louis to school, and by the time we got home at 9:30, you were falling asleep in my lap. I was adamant about seeing the GP. They don't muck about with children under 5. So despite being a busy inner city practice, I got an appointment before lunch. I carried you in to see this lovely Irish lady who took one look at you and immediately phoned the children's hospital, under the guise of needing a blood test that she couldn't do. With the phone tucked in her ear, busy exaggerating things to get you in there, she did basic tests. Oh, yes, sure, I'll listen to his chest now. Off the phone, she quietly said, "Do you want to ask me anything about this?" I silently shook my head, all too aware of the implications. I'm intensely grateful to this doctor for not palming me off with some rubbish about him seeming fine. Come back next week if you're still worried. I stuffed you into your outdoor onesie and pedalled straight to a busy winter A&E department. Disclaimer: we ride everywhere in an electric cargo bike. On reflection, I wondered if this was an inappropriate method of transport for a very sick child, but the upsides were that we could get there in 10 minutes flat, bypassing all the traffic and parking literally outside the front door. Due to being so ill, you were placid and easy to manage in this very stuffed waiting room, with Wallace and Gromit on repeat. Soon enough, a registrar consultant appeared to do some prodding. Then a nurse was sticking pads all over you to monitor your heart pattern. Half an hour later, we were in a silent, gloomy ultrasound room. It was so quiet in there that you snoozed your way through the abdominal ultrasound, a toddler first for this sonographer, apparently. A hint of things to come was that your liver was unusually large. A chest x-ray revealed nothing out of the ordinary. Back in A&E, and we were lucky enough to have our own quiet little section with the noisy chaos of a busy unit rising steadily. By now, it was approaching 8 p.m, and my lovely friend who happened to work there had the foresight to bring us food. My other son was having the surprising but deliriously exciting outcome of a midweek sleepover at her house with their 3 boys. We got up to the ward, and we'd already found out by accident. And I remember Ben saying, "Ben, I thought you had a virus." So there's more that can be said about that, but that was the sort of how it came about. So I can carry on. Or
I really appreciate hearing that, because I've been wondering personally, like, just like how you knew, and how it just like you randomly looked up leukemia. Out of all the things that you could have looked up, that was one of the things you looked up: leukemia, right? Is that what I heard through your story? Wow, that is just amazing. So how, this was like about February 2020, I think you said. And so how was it, like, the process of being like treating your son's cancer during the pandemic, and also at the time too, like trying not to catch COVID, which you are still trying not to do, but like, like trying not to catch COVID and your son having cancer. How was that? Like, what was that experience like?
Intense. Yes, it was. I wrote a much shorter passage about this that I wrote at that time, which I'll read you, and then we can talk a bit more, because there's things that come up in that. So I called this one the relentless COVID party, the COVID house party. So today, in spring 2020, I'm writing about how things are today, because there is a pandemic, because obviously we were diagnosed before. And can you believe it? It's a pandemic. As if our life wasn't hard enough already. In a strange way, though, it's the most normal that it has ever been inside our house. Outside of it is a weird, ghostly turmoil. Ben is off work. He would be a frontline NHS worker dealing with sick COVID patients, which is just untenable in our current situation. He would have to isolate himself from the family somehow. I mean, how? Live in the garage? Joshua's treatment is intensifying, so we are having to take him into hospital for various procedures, but due to COVID restrictions, you can only have one adult accompanying the patient. If Ben was away from us, what would I do with Louis? I can't call on anyone for help, not grandparents or friends. So that's that. We're all just at home. We took Louis out of school early. Ben had just made the decision to leave work, so it seemed ridiculous to be sending Louis there, given that children can be filthy vectors of disease. For all of you who are new to isolation, welcome to living with leukemia. So this was written in around the time that no one had been through lockdowns before. Joshua and I have been doing this for months, never seeing friends, washing hands relentlessly, going rigid when someone sneezes. Get out of my house. But it was just the two of us. So a curious upside is that we are all together. I mean, I'm not sure I'd actively pursue a pandemic to get this slightly positive feature, but you've got to enjoy the benefits that appear. We had been having a weirdly quiet few weeks at home with no disruption, apart from not stepping out of the bloody front door. I mean, what is normal now? So I had a sense of impending anxiety about last week, where we had to run the gauntlet and go into hospital. I literally planned the route in my head up to level 6 as if it was a military exercise. I was pretty much sprinting down corridors, carrying my heavy little lump, Joshua wailing at me that he wanted to walk. No, absolutely not. We must go quickly. And we arrived in the unit in a hot sweat. Everything is much quieter than usual. Fingers crossed that nurse with no mask on wasn't actually asymptomatic. With so many nights in hospital, I often pondered how vulnerable and reliant on nurses you are when terribly sick. I can't check what they're doing. I have to trust them. And it's the usual story, an understaffed ward in the middle of an international crisis. So that's just a little flavour of how things felt then. And obviously at that time, we were in quite a lot of chaos, I remember being there in February 2020 before the pandemic sort of really started. Like, we were all quite aware that something was going on. And I remember sort of talking to a nurse. She said, well, have you been to China? I was like, no. But in my head, I was thinking, but they do have flights though, don't they? So it was just the strange sort of like, sort of calm mongering and sort of
Calm before the storm.
Yeah, hilarious sort of, well, don't need to be worried about this, have you seen anyone from China? And masks definitely, were very patchy. They did come in later on, and I have to, they were probably doing a lot of the wrong things, but around that time, our department were, the children's cancer unit were very, very conscious of not wanting to affect their little people that they look after and cared for so marvelously. And they were actually sort of isolating themselves at that time. But it was all just felt like being in a war, really, and sort of knowing that you've got to give this child the treatment, because if you don't, they will literally die. So it's sort of, how do you weigh that up, really? Was there a specific question? Sorry, I've forgotten.
I guess if you could just like go through kind of like how just like what the process was like, and then getting towards like the end of the treatment and recovery, and then I want to kind of get into like clean air for kids too.
Yeah, sure. So it's a very long, for anybody who doesn't know, it's a very, very long road. They have intensive treatment for 8 months, where you literally, you're not going to try and have any sort of normal life. But then after that, they're treated for up to 3 years, which is a really big shock to me, because I just didn't know. I remember feeling totally sunk by that, like, what, I'm going to be doing this for 3 years? I just couldn't quantify how that was going to be possible. But yes, after the initial phase of intensive treatment, you're in what they call maintenance phase, where the children are continuously monitored. A lot of it's going on at home. So welcome to your new job as a community nurse, mum and dad. And because he had chemotherapy every day, and we saw the nurses not for that. So, Yes, we did a lot of it ourselves. But then obviously when he was 3, he turned 3 and he had to go back to school. So then you've got this sort of, well, how are we going to do that? With an airborne pandemic. And I just, the moment, I suppose, is the beginnings of Clean Air for Kids was when I was stood in the playground. It was winter 2022, I think, coming into 2022. And in the classroom, there was chickenpox, strep A, COVID, flu, the lot, and obviously chickenpox is very dangerous as well to children in leukemia treatment, because they have to know if they've been exposed. And obviously, because we live in this mad country, we don't vaccinate children for that like they do in Australia. So you're constantly on the run from who's got chickenpox as well. And they mostly get it around 3. So yeah, it was just felt like you were dodging every illness in existence. Not measles at that time, actually, interestingly, which has really shifted now. So yeah, I just remember thinking, how am I going to get this kid to school? And I think he was at that point doing a sort of hour play session with some very hand-picked, right, who's had chickenpox? Right, Mabel's had it. Okay, and so is the pal over there. Right, let's play with them and we'll do it all outside. And it was just so limiting and freezing, and I was sat there basically monitoring and watching and sort of shouting if anyone got too close. It was all just horrific and stressful. So yeah, I suppose that's where the sort of beginning of wanting to, what can we do, started at that point.
So I have 2 questions.
Yeah.
First one, what kind of precautions, and I guess non-pharmaceutical precautions, was the hospital, the nurses, the treatment center taking, kind of over in the initial stage, and also how has that changed over time?
Oh my gosh. Well, obviously, we're doing an awful lot of a lot of the right things. Obviously, they knew how. So to start with the really good things, all children like this, they do not go and sit on a ward with loads of other, they are in the Bristol Children's Hospital had recently sort of within the last 10 years been rebuilt. So it was a pretty great unit to be in compared to other places probably around the country. So up on the leukemia ward, every child would be in their own isolation room, and I guess this is when I learned about air quality a little bit, because the air would be filtered coming in and it would be filtered going out, and that would be happening obviously constantly, because you don't want any pathogens blowing. So there were no windows you could open, and so yeah, because you don't want any of the pollutants outside blowing in. For example, there was in the previous times, there was a church that had been being deconstructed, and I think there was aspergillus blowing around in the air, and you don't want that blowing in the window of an extremely vulnerable patient. So yes,
the opportunistic infection just from environmental stuff.
Yeah, mold, fungus, awful, don't want that. So so yes, once you actually got up into your isolation unit, because as soon as he got a temperature, he would be admitted to hospital. And that happened, 15 times a year. This was happening routinely, because they pick up infections so easily. And so, but they would have to be treated for that, so that it didn't turn into a bacterial infection on top of the viral infection. So they would just arrive at hospital and the antibiotics would start going in before they'd found out what the problem was. So yeah, I mean, the rooms were amazing. So lucky we are to have that. Obviously, though, the hospitals are all still wearing surgical masks. So yay for advancements.
They never did N95s even on the cancer.
No, that's still the case. I mean, they're not wearing masks now. It's madness. It's absolute. I mean, I've been
Did they wear masks before, like in 2019, for the kids with cancer?
Only at certain times. So, if the child was at a certain vulnerability, I remember them all coming in before the pandemic. I don't know what had been going on, but everybody came into the room. You'd have a whole row of consultants and other staff members come into your room to tell you something. And they were all wearing plastic aprons, gloves and a surgical mask. They talk talk at a distance for a few minutes, and then they'd all take them off and remove them, throw them in the bin, and walk out the door. So it's, yeah, I mean that was when there had to be sort of if the child's, if you know, people like in bone marrow transfer, they'd be doing that routinely. But if your child wasn't at that stage, then they would, you know, so there wasn't, I don't remember a lot of people wearing masks in the first few months. Obviously, when the pandemic arrived, then they all started wearing surgical masks. But, you know, as over time, when the government all told them they could take them off, they just did.
Yeah, I remember for us in the US, the great, quote unquote, great unmasking was in, 2022. And obviously there were people throughout who, were not masking and, never believed the pandemic existed. But, for us, 2022 was the big cultural shift where like people who previously had been masking and, paying attention kind of collectively were told they could take their masks off and it was over. Was it kind of the same case for you over in the UK?
Yeah, probably just a slightly different timescale. So we had the government announced that we had Freedom Day on July 2021. And I suppose that's when I woke up about it all then was, oh my goodness, what was going to do nothing? So that was July 21. That was the beginning of normal.
Yeah. Right, and incidentally, right when the Delta strain was festering in India and making them run out of oxygen.
Yes, I'm just going to shut my door because I can hear my family have come back, and I don't want them to make a noise.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the second question that I had was, how did Josh, your son, handle all of this? Because, this would have started at an extremely early age for him. So, I mean, in general, like the going through treatment, the pandemic, and then kind of transitioning from toddlerhood into like the school environment, like what was all of that like for him? And how did he adjust?
It's pretty hard to say, really, because obviously they change quite a lot from what age they are. And we were at different stages depending on what year he was at, because obviously he had to start sort of doing school. And so I was very controlling at the beginning, so immediately on at the teachers about opening windows. I'd built an air filter to go in his classroom. In fact, you can see one of the dirty ones behind me, which I've really not moved, which is not the best backdrop, is it? But, so yeah, it changed quite a lot. And I think now, though, I guess you just get into your rhythms. I think it's been incredibly hard for him, but he wouldn't necessarily say that or have an awareness of it because everything that happens to them just seems normal at the time. But yes, for us as a family, I mean, the whole journey's been insane.
Wow. I want to get more into, like, for the sake of time, I want to get more into like Clean Air Kids and what Clean Air Kids does and hopes to accomplish in the future and how you plan on accomplishing that as well. Before we get into our discussion with Arijit.
Sure. So I suppose dealing with my own school and trying to get that as good as possible, which is a moving enterprise, by the way. It's not something that's solved, until you get mechanical systems into schools. We don't have, just for your American listeners, we don't have a lot of that in the UK. We have windows and radiators. So we're really starting at ground level with improving things here.
You guys don't have central AC in a lot of your buildings.
No, because we're such a mild country, I suppose it's sort of not really ever been seen as necessary. So yeah, and a lot of the schools are really old, so they have windows and heating unit, and that's it. So it's taking a lot of time, and we also like many countries, the regulations are not good enough, so they need to be improved as well. So it's a kind of top down, bottom up approach. But I suppose I'd done quite a lot with my school, and then I just felt very profoundly that well, what about all those kids who are not at my school? What are we going to do? Once you've worked out that the air quality in schools is really quite terrible, you just think, well, yeah, but and you've seen it in the guidance, the NEU and other unions have written that it needs to happen, it needs to be improved. You just go, okay, well, what about all those other kids? So I sort of started, I suppose, with a point of like, what do we do? And a goal for me seemed to be, well, I suppose something achievable would be to change it in my city, because I have access to the power structures. I can go and talk to them. I can badger them. But since then, I've now moved into talking with other very keen beans around the country. And so we're literally just at the point of expanding beyond Bristol right now. So other great reps around the country, which I'm about to announce, and also had international interest, which has been really exciting. So, after I've expanded a bit nationally, we'll be looking to do that internationally. Like another exciting thing on the horizon is I'm talking to a brilliant academic in New Zealand, Amanda Kvalsvig, and we're hoping to do an international collab of some kind of education program for kids so that we can teach the children. So I'm really excited. Oh, and so I had her and Dr. Al Hadrell talking about that in person, because she actually, despite being in New Zealand, comes from Bristol. So that was a very exciting moment to have them two talking together about how we can make this happen. So yes, I guess it's just plugging away at politicians, continuously writing letters, asking them to do the right thing, and also providing an education package to help support that. That's what the future looks like a little bit for us.
Wow, thank you so much for your work. And for me, and I just feel like I'm really excited to see how this goes, and also like just share your work and like tell others that they can like replicate this, or this is like really like, something that can be, that you can look at and learn from. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Okay.
Such a good story. Thanks for sharing it, Ruth.
No problem.
All right. Well, I think we want to go over and get a conversation with our second guest, Arijit Chakravarty.
Yeah, great. So that is a really harrowing story, Ruth. It's sort of fascinating to see how disconnected the medical community is from actually what the science is. And that, I think, as we get into the next conversation, I think we'll see how that connects.
Yeah, that disconnect is just getting worse and worse, and it was never really that great to begin with. So Arijit, I know. Oh, Ruth, go ahead. You had your hand up.
You're muted, Ruth.
Amanda, I think you need to unmute her. Yeah, just general FYI, because of the security settings we have on here, if you hit mute, you will not be able to unmute without requesting from the host.
I completely forgot what my question was now. Yeah, I will stop interrupting, but I just wanted to chime into what you've just said there. Yes, I do feel like I have a huge amount of respect. I want to make that clear that, the consultants that dealt with Joshua's cancer treatment were absolutely fantastic, and I owe them everything. But there is a disconnect, and I think that a lot of consultants are literally in their lane, and they're not obviously reading widely. So there's that lack of, they're not going off and reading papers about COVID, they're in their lane reading about their specialty, which they are fantastic at, but it's not that kind of generalist, isn't happening. So anyway,
so I think that's a conversation worth having for a minute or two, which is science and medicine are two very different things. Scientists find new facts. Medicine applies established practice to treat diseases. So medicine is not scientists, and doctors are not scientists by training. They are trained to accept accepted medical practice and apply that to the care of patients. And medicine predates science. And the reason why the medical method works so well is because it relies on building knowledge that arises through social practices. And the medical method is fantastic, and it's been responsible for changing, human lifespan, frankly. But it's not science. And so in an emergent situation like COVID, where everything is new and everything is sort of evolving, medicine, the weaknesses of medicine in dealing with a new and previously uncharacterized, deadly condition were on display for all of us to see. It's not
Yeah,
because they're bad at being doctors, it's because doctors and scientists do different things.
was actually talking with someone yesterday about the timeline of the pandemics, particularly with regard to long COVID and like all of the organ damage and other, long-term effects of COVID. And the fact that to some extent we had evidence that this kind of stuff was happening or had the potential to happen extremely early on.
Mhm.
Like people who got sick who developed long COVID from getting sick in March 2020, like they were posting about it in April 2020.
Exactly.
And
Yeah.
like by July, there
Mhm.
was a ton of at least, anecdotal grassroots evidence that there was a lot of potential fallout from mass infection. But there was a delay.
2020.
Yeah. But there was a delay between all of that anecdotal, lived experience data being out there on the internet and that data actually being compiled into like studies, preprints, and then actually published into scientific literature. And I think that,
Well,
one of the biases of science and medicine is, in some people's eyes, until it's officially published in a journal, it's not real evidence. And
a little bit. I agree with most of what you're saying, but it's also a weaponization. So what we saw was this, and Ruth used the term calm mongering, right? Which is basically there were experts, right? Many of whom had very little actual day-to-day lived experience, either treating COVID patients or doing direct primary research in COVID, who were everywhere, right? And we all know who they are because some of those people have gone on to be very important in public health overall. And these people had lots to say about how we needed to hold our horses, how we needed to not react to things, and how everything, we had to wait for the data. And this was the crux of it, right? My group and my collaborators and I, we were publishing in the summer of 2020 in preprints. We had preprints out in the summer and fall of 2020 that this virus was going to quickly escape the immune system, that we were going to start seeing reinfections. By the time schools reopened, we had preprints out saying that you will massively increase the spread of COVID through schools. That was a preprint. Now, obviously, peer-reviewed publications take 6 months, but anybody with gumption, any scientist with gumption should be able to read a preprint and decide for themselves whether it makes sense or not, whether it checks out. You don't need to see the imprimatur of publication in Nature or Science. But what these calm mongers were doing was they were sort of saying, wait for the results to be peer-reviewed, then it was like, well, this is just one paper. And you can keep going that way. You can keep sort of stretching out, if you will, the timeline to react by simply saying we don't have enough data yet. When you have an emergent situation where the consequences are irreversible, waiting is precisely the wrong thing to do. And so a lot of these experts weaponized the scientific method in favor of inaction, because inaction was what benefited, quite frankly, the commercial real estate market or other people who had a dog in the fight. You had McKinsey out there, explaining to us that we would reach economic endemicity. And those things were not peer reviewed. Nobody said, oh, where's this new concept coming from? Let's make sure it's peer reviewed. No, everyone was like, oh, McKinsey said economic endemicity in a white paper, and that was enough to be off to the races. Meanwhile, the science that was on the table as early as 2020, 21 in preprints and eventually in peer-reviewed papers. By 21, there were peer-reviewed papers about long COVID. And everyone was like, let's wait for more information.
just unbelievable in practice, but
that is
you
well
can also kind of see how that happened. Just the establishment just being completely unprepared to handle that kind of global catastrophe.
That was so well said. And thank you so much for like being there to like start publishing and writing and just like getting into action. So shifting
Thanks.
our conversation more towards SARS-CoV-2 and cancer, I was wondering if you could touch at all on the oncogenesis genetic potential or even like patients who already have cancer and what COVID might do to that.
Yeah, those are two very different questions. I can give you the Cliff Notes versions for both.
Totally.
I'm also going to sort of pop some links in the chat. So we have this
Yeah.
intentionally awkwardly named YouTube channel called Monkeys on Typewriters in YouTube, which is
YouTube too.
yeah, we have videos. So Ryan Gregory and I have done a series of videos explaining how COVID could potentially be carcinogenic. And I'll give you the Cliff Notes version of that. Basically, one of the initiating insults for cancer is unrepaired DNA double-strand breaks. If your DNA breaks and your cells can't repair it, that kicks in motion a series of cellular, if you will, aberrations, abnormalities, that from one division to the next causes that particular dividing cell to scramble its chromosomes. As that cell scrambles its chromosomes, it essentially diverges from the rest of the body. The rest of the body is a collection of cells, all of which have the same programming and that are all playing by the same rules. Now you have a cell that's scrambling its DNA. It can slip if you will, the compact of multicellularity and say, hey, I'm just going to play for myself. When it does that, it starts proliferating. That's the initiating insult for cancer, and that's what drives cancer. You want to see more about it? I'll put the Monkeys on Typewriters on YouTube link.
I just found it and
right
I'm going
now.
to paste the link in.
Awesome. You're on
Yeah,
this.
I was subscribing right now.
You beat me to it. All right. So that's one piece of it, right? So that's, if you view cancer through that lens, then what you're seeing with SARS-CoV-2 is there's a bunch of things that happen with SARS-CoV-2. It's a very poor house guest. It infects pretty much any cell in your body or a large number of tissues. Some of those tissues are dividing tissues, and it hangs out in those dividing tissues with long COVID, for example, in the gut, right? Now, it hangs out in those tissues, but it also causes DNA double-strand breaks. It also suppresses the DNA damage response. Guess what? All of the known viruses out there do these two things. They will infect dividing tissues, and they will both cause DNA double-strand breaks and suppress DNA repair responses. So every known carcinogenic virus out there does these things. SARS-CoV-2 does these things. So if you have a persistent infection, especially in the gut, I would say, just as a practical matter, go get your colonoscopy done on a more regular basis, because you are at risk potentially for worse outcomes. Now, given that SARS-CoV-2 generates the same insults as other carcinogenic viruses, can we say we've proven that SARS-CoV-2 is oncogenic or carcinogenic? No. Because in order to take a hypothesis and bump it up to the level of a theory, which is the next level of scientific knowledge, takes years. Evolution was a hypothesis. Took a long darn time to make it a theory. Relativity didn't become a theory overnight. It takes years and years to get there. And this is where calm-mongering comes in, because we have a very plausible case that SARS-CoV-2 could be carcinogenic. To go from there to where it's proven without a doubt could take a really long time. If you have a minute, I can do a couple of show and tells on this to explain exactly how this works. So if you think about it from the standpoint, if you say, look at cigarettes, right? And so I'm going to share my screen. Cool.
Is that turned on for you to share?
It is now. Yeah, it is now. So if you look at cigarettes, right? And you ask the question, well, how long did it take, right, for us to know that cigarettes were harmful, right? It goes back to the Crimean War. People were talking about the link between cigarettes and cancer in the mid-19th century, right? They would call cigarettes coffin nails or cancer sticks as early as the 19th century. Now, from there were certain governments like the Soviets who made posters like on the left over here, on the right, kind of pointing out that smoking causes cancer. The Nazis were on this topic as well, weirdly enough, right? So all of that was happening in the 1920s to 1940s. It took the seminal papers on on cigarettes and cancer came out only in the 1930s and 1940s. And into the 50s, they did retrospective studies. Now, from there, you could say, well, obviously, as soon as the retrospective studies came out, smoking was all done, right? It was very much not done. If you look at the per capita cigarette consumption all the way into the 50s, it was still rising. When these papers were coming out, there were like prospective studies coming out. And it took them, these prospective studies were really like rock solid. That basically, the more cigarettes you smoke on the x-axis, the more likely you are to get cancer on the right axis. Doesn't get cleaner than this. It literally took them 50 years to get to the point where cigarette smoking and, basically dropped sharply. It literally took 50 years.
Wow.
And so
Wow.
if you think about that now let's take this one step further, right? And we can say, all right, well, what if tomorrow somebody came out with this quote unquote, pardon the pun, smoking gun that COVID causes cancer, right? So what would happen then? So let's suppose we said, all right, this is a graph of total total cancer cases, right? Hypothetically. And we say, let's say we know that the baseline incidence of cancer in the US is 18 million a year. So if you have 18 million a year and you say COVID doubles the likelihood of causing cancer, right? Or we could say it triples it, right? What you see is the area under the red. Let's say people start panicking when you have double the rate of, you have twice as many cancer cases as we do now. So let's say you had the point where you needed to see double the rate of cancer that you do today. Well, that point wouldn't get hit until the 2040s or 2050s, right? But as soon as it gets hit, there's this blue part of the curve, which is all the cancer cases that are now locked in because they're happening with a 20-year delay or a 30-year delay. So by the time it's very obvious to us from epidemiological data that COVID causes cancer, let's say, right? We will have infected everybody so many times that there's nothing to do about it, right? We're locking in this burden of irreversible harm in the distant future. And now, the longer the delay, the worse the situation gets. If we have 100, let's say, we say like the threshold is 50% increase in cancer rates, you're going to have a bigger and bigger burden of cancer that there's nothing you can do about because it's locked into the future because of all the COVID infections people have. So this is why it is so cockeyed to wait for proof. Today, you can make a plausible case that SARS-CoV-2 is carcinogenic, just on the basis of the fact that it generates the same insults as every other virus that's known to be carcinogenic. It would take me as a scientist thousands of hours of time and years and years and years to publish on this. We haven't published on this. The Twitter threads, there's a reason why they're Twitter threads. It's because, there's two reasons actually. One is peer reviewing scientists don't want to hear about this. It upsets them to hear about the various things that we talk about COVID. The 25 papers we've published on COVID, each one was a fight because we were dealing with peer reviewing scientists who are also human beings and who don't like hearing these nasty things about a disease that they're getting once or twice a year. And the second thing is that papers actually, the gap between the publications and outcomes, as we saw with cigarettes, could be 20 years long. There's a whole book called Merchants of Doubt, which is about how the cigarette lobby fought to limit the impact of science on regulations. They use that same playbook for climate. And today, it's not the cigarette lobby, it's not the fossil fuel lobby, it's every government worldwide is using those same techniques to limit the impact of the 500,000 papers and counting on COVID. There's 500,000 papers out there on COVID. Not one of them says COVID is a cold. Not one of them says it's benign. So all of this is to say, so go take a look at the Monkeys on Typewriters YouTube. I'm going to share the Twitter thread on COVID and cancer. And I also shared that Substack blog post about calm-mongering. These things are very tightly linked, which is, it's nothing more than a hypothesis that COVID could be carcinogenic, but it's a plausible hypothesis. And it's something that deserves consideration, waiting to see that this is undeniably proven as a scientific theory, could be a 40-year timeline. And during that 40-year timeline, everyone will get COVID over and over again. So what I would say is, in short, try not to get COVID. If you do, be very careful about your gut health, for example, because there's a bunch of dividing cells that would not do well infected with COVID. It's more or less the exact same mechanism with a different disease that Helicobacter pylori has, which is why H. pylori infections in your gut often lead, or in your stomach lead to stomach cancer, because pylori infects dividing cells and causes DNA double-strand breaks. It's not a virus, but it's a bacteria, but same mechanism. So long story short, it's a plausible hypothesis that COVID does lead to carcinogenic insults, and the less times you get it, the better. When it comes to COVID and cancer from the other perspective, and patients who have cancer with COVID, I think that part is very clear. I think COVID wipes out your T cells. T cells are actually very instrumental in controlling the disease, and that can have very negative impacts for patients with cancer. And many patients with cancer already are on treatments where their T cells are suppressed, which means that a course of COVID can also have worse outcomes. So COVID can very likely, it's plausible that it causes cancer. For people who have cancer, COVID is likely to lead to worse outcomes. It's very well documented. And for people who have had COVID already, their sort of immune systems in general are weakened, which opens them up to a wide range of nasties.
Yeah, and we're seeing these news articles about, younger people being diagnosed with these serious cancers, and colorectal cancer being on the rise, and people in their 30s, and everyone's like, how did this happen?
So here's the really nasty thing. Those trends predate COVID. So colorectal cancer in young people was on the rise going back to the early 2000s. So that creates a second level of problem for us, because that fact doesn't mean that COVID will not cause a further increase in cancer rates. It simply means the rise we're seeing is due to events that happened 20 years ago. So imagine that this baseline that I have here, you see this orange line, that's the baseline. Imagine that baseline was tilted upward. And now imagine that baseline was noisy. How much harder would it be to see the increase due to COVID? It makes it near impossible. Cigarettes increase your risk of lung cancer by 70-fold. And it took a damn long time for us to prove that cigarettes caused cancer, right? Now imagine that COVID doubles, triples, quadruples your rate of cancer. Those are not insignificant rates, because it's going to literally be billions of additional cases of cancer if that's true. But doubling or tripling the rate is actually quite small compared to what cigarettes did. And now you have a rising baseline because people were already getting cancer at a higher rate before the pandemic even started. And you have a noisy baseline. So this is like the dream situation. If your day job was to have more people get cancer, if somewhere out there in the government there's somebody whose day job is to make sure that more people get cancer, if there are people who are advocating for more COVID infections, they've got it really easy.
We have a question in the chat. Just a question regarding the curve. The top of the curve from where it goes down is the assumed point where implemented measures to stop COVID transmissions would translate in less carcinogenic consequences on a population level?
Yes. So let's suppose prevention started on this exact date, right? So I'll walk you through the graph again. So this is your baseline rate of cancer, and you have an uptick because of COVID under a 25-year delay, for example, right? Now, let's suppose you stopped on, this particular day in 2041, you said nobody gets COVID anymore. We eradicated COVID, right? It would still take another, 20 years for the rates to start coming down. Of course, none of this is going to happen. We're not going to eradicate it. People are still going to get it. So this is very much the best case scenario. And this says that governments will freak out when cancer rates increase by 50%. But again, as I said, the baseline is rising and the baseline is noisy already. So yeah, if you stopped COVID cold in its tracks and you eliminated it on 2041, it would take 20 more years before the cancer rates started falling, the same way as with cigarettes. So it's just wildly irresponsible. It's reckless beyond belief that we are being infected, that governments don't take clean air seriously, for example. It's reckless beyond belief because worldwide, they're sort of baking in all this delayed harm that could take decades to even show up.
Is there any way to get people to understand that? Because in the before in the chat, I drew a parallel with climate change and how, even if we were to cease all carbon emissions,
Yeah.
there would still be a lot of heating and, climate destabilization baked in just because of all of the CO2 that's already, or excess CO2 that's already in the atmosphere. And the latency part of it just seems to be something that people have a hard time conceptualizing.
Right. No, I totally agree. And so look, you can break that question down into two parts. You can say, if everyone was acting in good faith, how would one convince people about this, right? And that's already very challenging because the health harms of COVID are latent. They are stochastic. They happen at random. They happen to different people differently. So COVID is a very difficult disease to explain to people in all good faith, what's going on. But then on top of that, of course, there's no lobby for reducing COVID infections. There's no one benefits financially from reducing the rate at which people get infected. There's lots and lots of people who have a vested interest in making sure people get infected often with COVID. So unfortunately, the money, if you follow the money, it only flows in one direction. And then on top of that, it's a challenging scientific and sociological problem. And to Amanda Finley's point,
maybe schools or businesses like decreasing transmission for attendance purposes or performance, like don't they have somewhat of a, because I think that we're always trying to make that case for clean air, right? And how is it a financial
right.
case?
I think that's really perceptive, and it's a really good handle, which is the economic costs of repeated infection are very non-trivial. The learning loss consequences of repeated infections are very non-trivial. Those are the things to emphasize, because those would be the things that people care about. Things like, oh, you're going to get COVID once a year. It's very hard to even explain that to people. And then you say, well, COVID will increase your risk of cancer. Very hard to explain that to people. So I think you guys have it exactly right, which is focusing on clean air as being, hey, this is practical. These are things you can do to reduce how often you're sick. Do you like being sick every 3 months? Do you like, for those of us who are COVID cautious, we very rarely get a sniffle even. And I think back to, the before times, and frankly, it was just something you accepted as cost of doing business.
That is very true. I went back to masking back in 2023, and I haven't had a respiratory or viral illness since. And it is amazing how frequently, everybody was getting colds before, and everybody just accepted it. That's just life. And now that I haven't been getting colds in a while, that didn't have to be that way.
Yeah, 100%. And the thing about it is that viral infections are not benign. We've scratched only the very tip of we're only looking at the tip of the iceberg. In recent years, we know that mono, the kissing disease, increases your risk of multiple sclerosis by 17-fold, right? Mono was seen as just an annoyance, and people who would get it would be like, wow, that's nasty, but thank God it's not a serious illness. Well, it increases your risk of multiple sclerosis by 17-fold. So there's increasing evidence that a lot of the human overall lifespan issues are linked to this. I actually have a Substack post on this as well, which I'm going to share with you guys. It's very with Greg, with one of my collaborators. I'm just going to send it along. So at the end of the day, I think it's very easy to make the case that you shouldn't get infected with things. I think the counter argument has been made that it's sort of inevitable, right? Of course we're going to get infected, and we've always lived with these things. Another YouTube series on that Monkeys on Typewriters channel is called "How Does This End?" and it's worth a watch because it's long, but it's worth a watch. It kind of blends history with the science, and it points out, as Amanda did, that we are the only surviving hominid species out of 17. The other 17 hominid species are extinct. So it's worth asking the question why. You can make the case it's plausible that what killed them was infectious disease. What drove them to extinction was infectious disease. So the notion that we'll somehow let every infectious disease sweep through the human population, and the notion that public health's job is to act as midwife for every new pathogen that could eradicate us as a species is kind of, it's laughable, frankly.
I'm sorry, I missed that last part. Public health, what part's laughable? I want to laugh.
So the idea, look, the way we frame public health is that public health's job is to help every new pathogen become established and endemic in the population, right? That
Well said.
COVID was going to always become an endemic. That's in the whole flattening the curve thing, right? We opened the COVID pandemic with a game plan of making it endemic, of letting it get established in the population. This was the stupidest thing possible. Like, if you think of it, right, you're just playing Russian roulette. Eventually along will come a pathogen, and maybe it'll be something new, or maybe it'll be the next variant of COVID that will not get established in the population. Like, these are extinction level threats. Pandemics are extinction level threats.
That is so well.
Sarah, can I just ask you a question? Sorry, I haven't muted. I forgot. Helpfully. Yeah, I just want to ask a question about, obviously, the implication that we should all be restricting our COVID infections is obviously, I endorse that, but I'm feeling rather helpless as a parent right now because my son, we have successfully avoided. My husband had one infection last spring, and my son, as far as I know, he's just had his first COVID infection, my 13-year-old, and I always knew it would come through him because it's getting if you have a child in school, it is incredibly hard to ask them to mask in this current climate. So your chances of avoiding COVID infections, if they are attending an educational facility, is absolutely zero right now.
Yeah. So I can walk you through some of that.
Reality is that it's so sad that's
absolutely. I can walk you through it. So it's not all or nothing, right? If you get one COVID infection, that's worse than never having had it, but it's better than not having had 10 of them. I know people I have friends from my high school class who had COVID 6 or 8 times, and that's a high school class in India. People make fun of him because he's sick all the time, right? And it's really sort of gross to watch, but they're like, oh, well, dude, you're always sick. And yeah, he's had it 6 times. And every time he has it, it makes him more likely to get messed up the next time he has it, right? So this is a really important point. Amanda, by the way, put something in the chat, which is worth taking a look at, because this is not all or nothing. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that there are things you can do to restrict spread. So number one thing, obviously, even within the house, is to jack up your air filtration. And so I noticed in the background, Ruth, you're on top of that. So we have ACH of about 12 in every room in the house, right? And so it's kind of noxious because we have basically a massive HEPA filter in every room, but we live with it. And when people come home to our house and they ask, why do you have HEPA filters? I'm like, yeah, great, let's have that conversation. I mask everywhere I go in public, but my kids don't. And they've given up, they gave up years ago. And we just have to live with that. It's a hybrid situation where the total number of people I'm exposed to unmasked is much greater than 0, but it's much less than what it would be if I was unmasked everywhere. So we do have guests over from time to time at home. They are unmasked and untested. But I do test on a regular basis. The kids test on a regular basis. And then we vaccinate we sort of gigavax, if you will, right? So we vaccinate 3 or 4 times a year. We published a peer-reviewed paper showing that, I think last year, showing that if you vaccinate multiple times a year, if you can, that massively reduces your risk of infection. So between using the various different prophylactic sprays that people use, and between jacking up your air filtration rate and cranking on your testing as much as possible, those are all things you can do. And those can reduce your risk. Again, it's not all or nothing. Unfortunately, I think it's worth accepting that COVID will be the reason that every single one of us has a life expectancy that is shorter than we could have expected, right? The trend in increasing life expectancy, I think, has been broken And I think that is just you just kind of have to live with that. But at the same time, the less times you get it, the less times people around you get, your loved ones get it, the better fighting shot you have right now.
And I think it also goes hand in hand with being a parent. We can't protect them from everything as much as we want to, and as
Right.
much as we should try. There's going to be something that happens, and that really sucks.
That really sucks. And I think a large part of where we are today is that many people who have been richly rewarded for their advocacy, so to speak, during the early years of the COVID pandemic were precisely those people who suggested that all of this was inevitable and that infectious diseases don't matter. You should just eat healthier food or whatever it is, right? Go get some cold, go do some ice baths. So a lot of the people who have been able to position themselves front and center in public health are people who have really passionately advocated for the death of public health as an entity that is committed to fighting infectious disease. This is a huge, you go back to medieval time, you have to go back to medieval times to see how much of a rollback that is.
I can't wait to watch this video, and thank you so much for doing it. And anybody who hasn't taken a look at this YouTube channel yet, T. Ryan Gregory is also in it. And I just wanted to point that out because I think that is super exciting. And I feel like I just found a new show on Netflix or something. So that's literally the feeling I have right now. It's like the new Game of Thrones just dropped or something because, it's
Sarah?
not going to be necessarily always feel good.
It's a dark and gloomy story that involves you as well, personally.
Can you repost the link
there's
to the
a
video
question.
you're talking about? Just because there's been a lot of things posted in the chat.
Yeah, sure.
Okay,
you mean
I'll
the Monkeys
grab-
on Typewriters and YouTube channel?
I'll do that. I'll post.
Yeah, it's been a lot of
Yeah,
links.
here you go.
Yeah, Teresa posted it.
Thank you.
Okay. And then James had a question. Can we please have a link to that multiple vax year paper?
It's done. Maria Page posted it. It's done.
Oh, okay. Sorry about that.
Yeah. So again, it's depressing and it's really challenging as a parent. And I fully empathize with everyone else who's a parent because I'm going through the same thing myself. It's very unpopular to get them to mask. I can manage to talk them into masking in high traffic situations if we go on a flight and so on and so forth. I can get them to mask, but otherwise we're really just relying on testing, vaccination, and limiting spread inside the house. We had my daughter bring it into the house once. It didn't spread to anyone else, although we were testing with molecular tests, PCR grade tests every day for 2 weeks. We managed to hold it at bay just with our precautions. And then when my son brought it in, he managed to infect me. But that was because he was asymptomatic for 2 full days. And the timing of the test just lined up. So it's going to happen. But again, 1 is better than 2, 2 is better than 3. Less is more when it comes to getting infected.
Yeah, I think I finally managed to talk Sam into masking at school again. I sent him home with a flow mask, which he hasn't worn yet.
Yeah.
But we had a talk last night about, hey, buddy, I was in the hospital in December. It wasn't COVID, but let's try to not get each other sick. I'm doing my best not to get sick, and I don't want you to get sick either. And he was like,
if there's one
masks. And I told
if there's one place to spend political capital, in my opinion, it's vaccination.
Yeah.
So I've spent my political capital with my kids on vaccination, and you can go feral with vaccination, especially if you're immunocompromised or you have other conditions. But yeah, the more often you can get them to vaccinate, the better off they are. Yeah. That's one place to really emphasize.
Thankfully, one thing his dad has not fought me on. Other masks that I've sent over to his house are thrown away. So I thought, well, maybe if I send a flow mask, it won't wind up in the trash can. But
masking there's an emotional reaction that people have. Masking reminds them of the pandemic. It reminds them of the bad old days. Not wanting to not mask explicitly is something I see even COVID cautious people doing because they feel like we can't mask forever. I'm like, do you wash your hands all the time, or have you set a timeline for after which you'll stop washing your hands?
Yeah, or using seatbelts.
Seatbelts.
Yeah. Am I going to wear seatbelts every time I drive for the rest of my life?
Down my
Yes,
gut.
Yeah, I mean,
yes,
you know,
it's not
a
that big a
large,
deal. I don't
a,
want to get injured. It's not going to prevent a car crash, but it's going to, it's going to prevent me from being drastically more injured than I would be otherwise. And it's a tiny thing. And it's not that big a deal to mask in public as long as we don't have clean air, policies.
yeah, well said. And I think one of the things, one of the points I make in the How Does It End video series is the pandemics that have swept through human society have been a consequence of choices that we have made as a society. So when we made the choice to live with rats, and I'm not talking about the cute pet rat type, but the actual feral rat type, when we made the choice to live with rats, and lice and fleas, what we got as a reward for learning to live with it was the bubonic plague. Then at some point we said, you know what, we're not doing that anymore. So the bubonic plague will not be a threat to modern society anymore. When we made the choice to drink unfiltered water and to raw dog sewage, the reward we got for learning to live with it was typhoid. Exactly, Melissa, after 1/3 of Europe died. The reward we got
Yes, that's
was
the threshold.
typhoid. Okay, well, it can still happen. When we made the choice to live with raw sewage, we got typhoid and cholera as our reward. And again, at some point we said we're not doing that anymore. So at some point we'll say we're not raw dogging each other's exhalations anymore. And once we upgrade the air handling, say in our country, for example, for the cost of one aircraft carrier, we could have an ACH of 6. That'll make these diseases much less likely to spread. That makes respiratory pandemics much less of a threat. So whatever you choose to learn to live with will be the thing that kills you in the end as a society.
Yeah, I think that's really been his biggest fear is me dying, and that's a whole other conversation. And I've had to tell him, buddy, we all die. I am not imminently going to die that I know of, and I'm doing everything in my power. But I think being in the hospital really kind of shook him. He's like, "Are you going to die?" And I said, "No, I'm here. I'm here. I'm doing everything I can to stay alive. But I need you to help me stay healthier. Let's not get each other sick. It's not about dying or not dying. It's about the quality of life that we have."
Yeah. No, I can only imagine how much of a challenge it's been for you. And it's brutal that we're all in this situation to varying extents. But one thing I will say is one other attitudinal shift that I have sought to sort of drive among my loved ones is, look, take a forward position with respect to COVID. It's okay if you have COVID. It's okay if that sniffle turns out to be COVID. You're better off knowing about it, because COVID comes on slow and then ends up with larger and larger consequences. So COVID is not something you want to ignore. You want to know that you have it, and you want to take mitigating steps. For example, getting COVID today can lead to a 17-fold, I believe, increased risk of a heart attack in the following year. So you should know you have COVID before you go exercise. My daughter's had 3 of her friends whose parents were in my age group. 3 of them die of heart attacks. And that's not normal for people in their early 50s. But again, like, knowing that you have COVID lets you take rational steps to mitigate the downstream consequences, whether it be taking Paxlovid, whether it be getting rest, whether it be not working out while you have a cold. These are all things that you can do once you know you have COVID.
Yeah, there's I don't know if you know Jackie Baxter. She does the Long COVID podcast. She talked with me. This has been years ago now, but she used this clip, and it's still out there circulating, where I know I can only do so much to prevent myself from getting COVID, but once I have it, the ball is completely in my court as to stopping the spread. Because once I have it and I give it to one other person, that causes a chain of transmission that does result in someone's death. It's probably someone I won't know, I will never hear about, but it still causes death, and I'm not okay with that.
I think that's a really strong point for social solidarity, and it's a really sort of evolved mind frame. I think that places you in probably a fraction of 1% of American society today. I think most Americans are like, "Fuck you, your life or death is not my problem." And I think COVID has actually gotten us to that point where everyone's like, "Screw you, buddy. I'm going to go live my best life, and if you happen to die, oops, too bad." So I actually emphasize the cost to each individual from COVID, because every single one of us is vulnerable. There's no vulnerable sub-community of people. 1 out of 3 infections or 1 out of 5 infections is persistent. Many persistent infections are progressive. And so COVID will end up killing a lot of young, healthy people who are out there, pumping iron and eating kale. And that's just how it goes. So a lot of these people who out of pure selfishness have taken the position of being COVID friendly or, pro-COVID, need to know that that will have consequences for themselves when they are working out one of these days and get a stroke. So from my perspective, I try to impress upon everyone that we're all vulnerable. This is not like one of those things where if you pump iron and you get shot at, it's not going, you're going to have better outcomes, right? And so I think this is a foundational myth, if you will. Go ahead.
Which is what the current head of HHS is trying to convince people
of. I think that's true. Exactly.
Is...
I think that's true all over the world, right? You watch these idiot Belarusian special forces troops, and they break asbestos on each other's heads to show you how strong they are. And it's like, dude, you can get shot in the head with a bullet, and that's not gonna. Your working out will not help that. Like, there's this foundational myth, especially among men, that if you pump more iron, you're healthier, and if you're healthier, then you're going to have less negative outcomes with infectious disease. Well, infectious disease doesn't care how many reps you can do or how much you can bench press, dude. And I think this is sort of this toxic masculinity, toxic mindset. And as you said, Melissa, it's eugenics driven. And the reality is that if there's any kind of natural selection happening here, it's not for people who are bigger and stronger.
Wow. Well said. I was wondering if we could maybe open it up to questions. Okay, but I do see a question here from Maria. How important, did somebody else read this question? How important do you think it is for people who work in a cancer support environment around cancer patients to mask?
I mean, so who are you asking me? I mean, from my perspective, of course, it's important. Good luck trying to get them to mask. If you yourself are working in a cancer environment, definitely mask. What you're doing is kind, and what you're doing is helpful. I think when you're dealing with physicians or practitioners who are not masking, again, you're going to be dealing with those trade-offs. If you yourself are masked, your risk of being infected drops dramatically. I can tell you, I swear by my masks. We go into very high risk situations with masks on, and generally speaking, masks hold. They are one-way masking is a reasonable line of defense. If you have a fit tested N95 or better mask, then you're in good shape. Listen.
So with the current political and cultural environment we're in, there are a lot of people who are high risk, who have cancer or other immune compromising diseases who don't mask. And it's one of the things that just baffles me. Is it just fatigue? Is it peer pressure? It's like,
I mean, a lot gets said about the current political climate, and a lot gets said. It's very easy to dunk on the existing HHS secretary, and his brainworm. It's very easy to criticize this administration for what they're doing, right? But that's a little bit of it's a little bit of, if you will, a cheap shot, because ultimately, the people who did the most to normalize repeated infections, I would say, were the Biden administration and the left-leaning governments of the world, who went up front and center to advocate for the virus as if they personally were getting money every time someone got infected. I think we saw a huge amount of normalization coming from the left on this. So there was a tremendous betrayal of public solidarity from the left on this in 21, 22. And I think we are here today because of that. If that had not happened, I think we would be in a very different situation. So yes, of course, the current secretary of HHS and his brainworm, to a certain extent, the two of them have been very instrumental in pitching sort of things that are really out there, if you will. But that climate was created by a repeated failure. It has to be said that the CDC lied to us, Fauci lied to us over and over and over again about washing your hands, about 6 feet, like
He's
all of
so
these things. He so lied, right? So the right has a very valid point that they lied to us about that. They lied to us that the pandemic was the pandemic of the unvaccinated. They lied to us that if you get vaccinated, you have nothing more to worry about. These were lies. And they were lies that were pushed by the public health establishment during a democratic government. So these were no. It's not like the facts changed. It's not like we learn new things. And everyone's we often hear this narrative of, well, science often is uncertain. No, it was 100% not uncertain. We were publishing in 2020 that schools were going to spread COVID. We were publishing that vaccines were not going to bring an end to the pandemic. We were publishing that it was a mistake to reopen. We had a preprint titled "The Spectre of Manaus" about unmasking in May of 2021, the Great Unmasking. It came out the same week, the preprint came out the same week that Rochelle Walensky went on TV and said, if you're vaccinated, you have nothing to worry about. She was the one referring to masks as the scarlet letter of the pandemic. So all I'm saying is that at the end of the day, we're here today because public opinion and the way the public behaves is deeply influenced by what people they trust tell them about their health. If your doctor tells you something, if the CDC tells you something, you believe it. The whole thing went where it went because in a bipartisan way, our government, and for that matter, governments worldwide, decided to pitch the idea that COVID was nothing to worry about in the teeth of science that was arguing very clearly that it was something to worry about. So I don't know if that fully answered your question, but all I'm saying is that, the dysfunction, it can be placed squarely in the, at the feet of the people who were supposed to be the experts on this.
Wow. What a response. I'm like writing notes from the things you say. Thank you. Ruth, I was wondering if you wanted to also maybe try to answer that question as well. I think the question was, let's see if I can find it. I think it was, how important do you think it is for people who work around cancer patients or cancer environment to mask?
Just answered that.
Oops. Yeah. We can lip read. Ruth is muted. So.
Okay. Hi, thanks, Sarah. Sorry, I got distracted there. What was the actual question? Distracted, panicked by not being able to speak. What was the question?
How important is it for people who are working with cancer patients or in cancer support environments to be masking?
Oh, there's only one answer to that, isn't there? I mean, it's hugely important. Unfortunately, what is going on the ground, it's just hearing everything that's just being said now. It's just so distressing and frustrating that the knowledge. I live with medics, they're all in my family, and their knowledge, I think we've been over this, but their understanding of this is so far, like literally, I won't name this person, but like a professor that I talked to who does understand was saying that the knowledge that out there in the street compared to what we know from papers, everything that Arijit's just been saying is that it's terrifying gap. And I just want to know how to fix that, really, so that at least the medics have some basic understanding. I was talking to a relative of mine who's a medic and trying to explain, what I've been doing. And he just said, well, what about microplastics? Why are you not bothered about that? I was like, oh, what? Hang on a minute. So if I was a anti-shark fin campaign, he'd be like, well, what about the turtles? Don't you care about the turtles? I was like, oh my God. Yes, of course I was slightly worried, pretty worried about microplastics, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't be concerned about this, but that's the level of rebuttal that you're getting in society from medics. So yes, I would love there to be masking uniformly in cancer clinics, but given that I know what the medics think is, and when my partner had it as a medic, he went into his department when he got over his infection and still went into wearing a mask in the hospital. And his doctor friend said, oh, you're still wearing that? Oh, how annoying. So
Yeah, people get threatened by it. They just don't
yeah,
like it.
they don't like it
Yeah.
because it's indirectly, passively, aggressively, almost,
Yeah.
it's shedding them in a bad light, isn't it? It's like,
Yeah,
it's almost
exactly.
saying to them, why aren't you wearing it?
Well, they feel accused. So there's a Substack called, so Monkeys on Typewriters is also a Substack. And there's this article about, you don't need to catch that wave. It's just talking about sort of what you can do to avoid getting COVID repeatedly. But I think it's a continuum, right? And I think we just need to think about where we're spending our political capital, right? And so from my perspective, the choices I've made are vaccinating as often as possible, personally masking, because I can control that, and then pushing people in my family to test as often as possible. Now, I get it. A lot of these things it's a question of privilege. A lot of these things are expensive. But anything you can do to move in the direction of, be it using mouthwashes, be it using sprays, be it using, be it vaccinating as often as possible, anything you can do to reduce the number of times you get it is only in your benefit. There's always going to be a positive return on investment for any step you take that reduces your likelihood of getting it over and over again, because the actual health harms are just legion. And what we're seeing in the real world is only a very small fraction of all of the health harms possible. If someone said, well, I have here this powder that you can snort that could cause health harms an undefined quantity of time in the future, sure, if I was 21 years old, I might snort it. I might even snort it off a toilet seat. But as you get older, you sort of see why this is a bad idea, and why, taking that mindset of, if I can snort something off a toilet seat, I can snort anything I want, will work out well for me, just is not a functional way of living your life. Sorry, I had to go there.
I just distracted.
That is great. That was just like, that was so great.
I mean, at the end of the day, right? I mean, if your only interaction with true public health issues is that you have a medieval infection that has been eliminated from most of civilized society because you play with roadkill, maybe you're not qualified on these topics, right?
Well, I mean, that's the point with this administration.
Yeah.
Put the absolute most toxic person for whatever that particular agency happens to be in charge. Just to
and I think
send a message to
100%. To send a message. And I think we are 100% here today because the administration before this directly, stabbed public health in the back. We can't discuss where we are today without discussing where we were from 2021 to 2024. And I think that at the end of the day, when all of this goes down, because we are not done, we are in chapter 2 of the pandemic. We're very much not done. At the end of the day, when the dust settles from this, hopefully we avoid it. We avoid the worst consequences. But when this is all said and done, I think there needs to be a reckoning for what happened. And I think to some extent, I always tell people it's kind of like this, right? Sooner or later, this is all going to go down. Something really ugly is going to go down as a result of COVID, right? And it's kind of like that joke of two hunters meeting a bear in the woods, right? And one of them starts lacing up his shoes, and the other hunter goes, "What are you doing? You can't outrun a bear." And so the first hunter goes, "I don't need to outrun the bear. I just need to outrun you." So as long as we can avoid getting COVID as often as possible, eventually the cost to society, the cost to the non-COVID cautious individuals keeps mounting. Eventually, they will decide that they cannot accept this cost. And hopefully, we having had COVID less often, benefit from their delayed but eventually inevitable learning the hard way.
I feel like the
without
time
having to do it
on
ourselves.
keeps getting pushed out, though.
Yeah, no, I agree. I agree.
Like
I
how much more?
thought they would have figured it out by now. Yeah, but you
So
always see this,
when
right?
do you think,
you always see these.
what's the new date on when you think they will have it figured out? Do you have a new
So I'll tell you, we've
hypothesis?
been right about every single thing we said about the virus. We've been wrong on every single thing we said about how people would react, right? Because I never expected to live in this timeline, right? Where like cognitive tests, people are doing worse on. Cancers are up. infectious diseases are proliferating, and everyone's like, experts are perplexed. And after a while, I realized that being perplexed was a prerequisite for being a platform expert. But if you're not perplexed, you shouldn't be an expert, apparently, in today's day and age, right? So a lot of this is the media has managed to create an ecosystem where you have a lot of calm mongering. I sent that link on calm mongering. A lot of calm mongering where people are basically just pitching this idea that there's nothing to worry about. And it's whenever you see something bad happening, there's a whole host of people who will show up and say, this is confusing, or we don't understand. So yeah, I just don't know.
Can I put a pin in this since people are starting to sign off, just for some announcements on our upcoming calls?
Sure. Yeah.
So as everyone here probably knows, March is Long COVID Awareness Month. And both of our planned talks for March are going to be about long COVID. Our first one is going to be Thursday, March 5th. The topic is living with long COVID, and we are going to be featuring our own Amanda Finley, as well as Becky and Sarah Robertson. Actually, both of them are first wave long haulers. And then the second one for March is going to be on Thursday, March 19th. This is going to be on long COVID in young adults, featuring Ariana Zwern and Marissa Swanson. And just to repeat from the top of the hour, we do have an audience survey set up to try and gauge people's opinion on whether Thursday or Sunday is the better day to hold these in the future, as well as a space for people to request future topics or future guests. Teresa, any housekeeping from fan side?
I think that mostly covers it. Folks can follow us on all of our the major social media platforms. You can sign up for our newsletters at fan.global/contact, and we'll keep you informed about the events in March and all the other upcoming Zoom events. We do plan on hosting these Zoom discussions twice a month. And yeah, as Melissa said, we're always looking for new topics and great guests to have on. So if you've got any ideas, please fill out that survey.
I just dropped in the links to our newsletter signups for both organizations, and I will also drop in our social media handles. Circling back around, I know that we're pressed for time. Any closing remarks or anything that you'd like to say, either speak?
Just really quick, the thought crossed my mind. It's not just a matter of whether you live or die. There's this liminal area, like so many other things. It's not just cancer. There are so many things that long COVID can lead to. And I think we lose sight of that. It's not just death. There's this whole thing, this liminal area in between. And I wish we would focus on that more.
Yeah, like the liminal space is kind of ended up being the bigger deal with COVID. I mean, obviously the initial stage of the pandemic with all of the deaths was absolutely awful. But once we got the vaccines, it was largely able to mitigate that part of it, and we completely forgot and lost the plot on the whole chronic illness side of it.
Well, and I hate even saying once we got the vaccines that no, long COVID is still long COVID. Long COVID will kill you slowly, and that's the full stop discussion.
Yep.
Yeah, so the notion that long COVID will kill you slowly, I think people are missing. And Amanda, you and I have talked about this, but that's something that is worth doing science on. But yeah, so you asked for closing remarks. So my closing remarks, just real quick. Look, depressing though it is, it can all seem like hopeless. And depressing though it is, there's a flip side to this, which is if you're here today, we're talking today, you're aware that these are issues. You're aware that that COVID is something that you want to avoid, and that's in your interest to avoid. So you're already better off than most of the population. And I think at the end of the day, it's not inevitable that you will get COVID once or twice a year. You may get it once in a while. Your odds of dodging severe outcomes of COVID are much better if you take it seriously, if you know you have it, you get treated. Check out Monkeys on Typewriters. There's a whole thing on what to do if you have COVID as well. Like, fight it, stay in the fight. Social solidarity was our original reason in certain ways for doing these things. Social solidarity is long gone. But even if you're playing for your own outcomes, keep playing for your own outcomes, keep playing for the outcomes of your loved ones, because at the end of the day, those things matter. They will prolong your staying power in this whole thing. And eventually the costs are, each individual will face the costs of their choices. So hang in there, and it's not hopeless for you personally, or for the people that you can convince to take it seriously. It's not hopeless.
Ruth.
Yeah, hi, thanks. Yeah, I'd just like to say, I suppose, even when everything feels pretty bleak, that we are all making a new future. And we have to find ways of talking to people. And I suppose the way I've found is by talking about the benefits to children in the place where they are mandated to be, that we have to see the benefits of cleaner air for them to breathe. And it's just so important for their, as we know, for their health and their well-being. And they have a right to be in school, and they have a right to be safe in school. And so that's the argument I keep using. And I will continue.
Well said.
And I think they're the children are the future, so we teach them as well. We need to teach them, because they will lead the way. That is actually a Michael Jackson line, but they will lead when they see the importance of it, which they catch onto these things pretty quick. So if we teach them what to do, they will lead us out of this, I hope. And so, yeah, just link arms all around the world, isn't it? And do it together.
All right. Well, thank you both of you for coming out and having this amazing discussion.
Yes, thank you both so much. It's lovely to have you both of you.
It's good to see you, Arijit.
Thanks. Yeah, likewise, man. Yeah, I mean, it's a great conversation. I think these kinds of conversations are really sort of mutually beneficial, because the more you talk about it, the more you reflect on it, it's sort of it's something we're all going through right now. So it's always a pleasure to be involved in conversations always.
Absolutely. Thank you to everybody who came today. It's great to
thanks for having us.
Great to be building communities.
Thank you.
With everybody coming.
All right. Well, I think we can go ahead and wrap up here. Everyone else, have a good rest of your Sunday. Thank you for coming out.